How the real world at last became a myth. History of an era. Is the world real? Do we have access to it? Or, because of our imperfect senses, are we trapped in a mere world of appearances? A world of half-truths, illusions, masks, metaphors, metonymies, tragic and farcical falsities, dreams. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote The History of the Real World in his 1888 pamphlet, Twilight of the Idols, or How to Philosophize with a Hammer. Nietzsche wrote this work as an introduction to his philosophy. In section 4, entitled How the Real World at Last Became a Myth, History of an Error, Nietzsche describes the entire history of the quote-unquote real world in about 250 words broken up into 6 stages. Stage 1. The real world, attainable to the wise, the pious, the virtuous man. He dwells in it. He is it. Oldest form of idea, relatively sensible. Simple, convincing, transcription of the proposition I, Plato, am the truth. Here Nietzsche travels to the beginning, 2,500 years ago in ancient Athens. Plato, one of the greatest philosophers in history, is this beginning. Plato believed there was a quote-unquote real world, but it is not this world down here. The quote real world was the world of forms, the true, eternal, unchanging, and essential nature of reality, easily available to the great gods who feasted on their beauty. We puny mortals down here are mere reflections of the forms, imperfect. There are 2 ancient Greek words Plato uses when describing the forms. The first is morphe, the form that all matter, or hule in ancient Greek, takes, or more precisely, the boundaries or limits anything has. While a form limits a thing, it also delimits its essential characteristics, which leads us to the second word, idea. What is delimited, or revealed to us by a form, is the idea of a thing. But the idea of a thing we experience down here is only the puny, muddle flash of the pure idea as it exists in the quote-unquote real world of forms. Most cannot even see the flash, but the wise, pious, virtuous philosopher can learn to see these flashes, and potentially more. Through careful study of the forms and the platonic love of teenage boys, one could gain access to the real world. The true world. This means the real world is actual. It is in the here and now. With Plato is the first delineation of the real from the apparent, the true from the false. Plato, the one who dwells and is the way to the forms, reveals the truth. The truth has a firm foundation in the eternal existence of the forms. Stage 2. The real world, unattainable for the moment, but promised to the wise, the pious, the virtuous man, to the sinner who repents. Progress of the idea. It grows more refined, more enticing, more incomprehensible. It becomes a woman. It becomes Christian. In this stage, the idea progresses beyond to the Neoplatonists, and later to the church fathers of Christianity, especially Saint Augustine of Hippo. The quote-unquote real world cannot be attained in this life, this apparent fallacious life of the sinner's body, but it can be promised. The quote real world is no longer actual but possible. Follow the ideals of Christianity in this life of suffering. Castigate and defy your sinful flesh. For the promise of heaven in the eternal afterlife with God and the J-Man himself. The truth becomes more refined, less abstract with the myth of the God-man boy Jesus and his sacrifice. And the truth becomes incomprehensible, for God and the truth are one and the same, and, by definition, God is that which no greater thing can be conceived. Oh, and this line, it becomes a woman, there's no hidden meaning. Nietzsche is just a misogynist. Nietzsche is the OG incel! Stage 3. The real world. Unattainable, undemonstrable, cannot be promised, but even when merely thought of a consolation, a duty, an imperative. Fundamentally the same old sun, but shining through mist and skepticism, the ideal grown sublime, pale, northerly, Königsbergian. Step 3 is the zeitgeist of modernity, formulated in Kantian transcendental idealism. Philosopher Immanuel Kant spent most of his life in the northerly Prussian city of Königsberg. Kant, like previous philosophers, divided the world between real and apparent. There was the phenomenal world, which we access with our limited and puny senses, and the noumenal world, the thing in itself as it truly is beyond our puny understanding. Unlike the previous steps, the noumenal, or quote-unquote real world, is a world we have no access to. We're simply too puny to fully grasp it. But Kant is still the same old sun. Despite being both unattainable and undemonstrable, Kant still assumed the noumenal world must exist for reasons. Kant is still a foundationalist. The truth is founded in a perfect theoretical world. The quote-unquote real world has gone from actual to possible to merely theoretical, or perhaps merely hypothetical. Reason itself demanded the quote-unquote real world exist as a consolation, a duty, and an imperative. Kant's moral philosophy is called deontology. Deon is ancient Greek for duty. We have a duty to reason itself to believe the quote-unquote real world is the noumenal world, forever only in our heads. Between stage 3 and stage 4 is a major break in this aphorism. Stages 1 through 3 all exist within the historical period that Nietzsche elsewhere refers to as practical nihilism. Practical nihilism is any doctrine that preaches the ascetic ideal, an ideal which posits the true reality as some existence we have no access to, and therefore can never prove. For Nietzsche, because there is no access to this other but more real world, the ascetic ideal is a villing towards nothingness. This nihilism is practical, in that ascetic priests certainly don't believe they are villing towards nothingness. No one can reasonably claim that Plato, the various and multi-faced authors of the Bible, or even Kant lacked incredible imaginative powers, but through one's actions, and acting towards what is not, one is practically nihilistic. On the other hand, stages 4 through 6 seem very different. It was easy to see that the philosophies of Plato, Christianity, and Kant were what Nietzsche is referring to in stages 1 through 3 respectively. But with the second trilogy, it is more difficult to ascertain who Nietzsche is referring to. The second trilogy exists within the historical period of theoretical nihilism, a period which we still exist in today. Theoretical nihilism is the devaluation of the highest values, i.e. the ascetic ideals of practical nihilism. It's clear, to Nietzsche at least, that upon reflection that these beliefs are nothing, that believing in them is a villing towards nothingness. Stage 4 is arguably the stage where the death of God occurs, which I talked about in this video here. Finally, it is very likely in the second trilogy that Nietzsche is referring to his own philosophical development. Let us continue. Stage 4. The real world. Unattainable? Unattained at any rate. And if unattained, also unknown. Consequently, also no redemption, no duty. How could we have a duty towards something unknown? The gray of dawn, first yawnings of reason, cock-crow of positivism. If, as Kant argued, the real and true world is forever out of our grasp, then why bother even thinking about it? The best we can do is rely on our senses in the apparent world to guide us through life. The last sentence in the parenthetical, cock-crow of positivism, is probably the most pregnant sentence in this stage. The positivism of the 19th century is often attributed to French philosopher Auguste Comte. The Stanford Encyclopedia describes positivism as coming, quote, closer and closer to truth without reaching it. There is no place for absolute truth, but neither are there higher standards for the fixation of belief. In the apparent world, our senses, applied via the sciences, are all that can give us any semblance of truth. This stage fits with Nietzsche's middle period, where he published the works Human, All Too Human, and Daybreak. The Gray of Dawn is a clear reference to Daybreak. Nietzsche called scientific truths unpretentious and a sign of a higher culture when compared to metaphysical truths, because science achieved its truths through rigorous work. Nietzsche did not outright deny the existence of the noumenal world. Quote, it is true, there could be a metaphysical world. The absolute possibility of it is hardly to be disputed. We behold all things through the human head and cannot cut off this head, while the question nonetheless remains, what of the world would still be there if one had cut it off? This is a purely scientific problem and not very well calculated to bother people over much. But all that is hitherto made metaphysical assumptions, valuable, terrible, delightful to them, all that has begotten these assumptions is passion, error, and self-deception, the worst of all possible methods of acquiring knowledge. Not the best of all, have taught belief in them. When one has disclosed these methods as the foundation of all extant religions and metaphysical systems, one has refuted them. Then, that possibility still remains over, but one can do absolutely nothing with it, for one could assert nothing at all of the metaphysical world except that it was a being other, an inaccessible, incomprehensible being other. It would be a thing with negative qualities. Even if the existence of such a world were never so well demonstrated, it is certain that knowledge of it would be the most useless of all knowledge, more useless than even the chemical composition of water must be to the sailor in danger of shipwreck. At the same time, Nietzsche saw scientific truth as undermining any transcendental morality. The way the world behaves has nothing whatsoever to do with morality. The world understood by science is neither good nor bad, and each scientific discovery destroys countless imaginary causalities, morality, supposedly affected upon the world. Ultimately, the moral holdovers of Christian asceticism appear as lies we can no longer tell ourselves. Finally, when Nietzsche says, first yawning of reason, he's likely referring to the fact that Kant died peacefully in his sleep. Metaphysical reasoning no longer has any work to do. Scientists do not study metaphysics, yet they continue to believe a number of presuppositions which Kantian reason elaborated. What could science be hiding?
47. It's a trap!
Stage 5. Real world. An idea no longer of any use, not even a duty any longer. An idea grown useless, superfluous, consequently a refuted idea.
Let us abolish it.
Broad daylight, breakfast, return of cheerfulness, and common sense. Plato blushes for shame. All spirits run riot. Here, Nietzsche finally abolishes even the theoretical possibility of the noumenal world. The only world which exists is the world of appearances. We finally break our fasting of the apparent world for the real world. But with the abolition of the quote-unquote true world comes the abolition of the truth itself. Now, the truth is refuted. We live in a world full of false illusions and masks. Here, theoretical nihilism matures as the highest values are devalued into the fictions of the world of mere appearance. This is a negative relativism, where all truths and morals are equally useless. In stage 4, the sciences still relied on the conception of the truth as invented by Plato. The truth is out there. We may never get it fully in our grasp in stage 4, but it is still out there beyond our senses, an eternal truth.
Let us abolish it.
Even the sciences become dubious to Nietzsche. He calls science a cult of untruth, whose insights only provide, quote, delusion and error as conditions of intelligent and sentient existence. Elsewhere, Nietzsche says, quote, science at its best seeks most to keep us in this simplified, thoroughly artificial, suitably constructed, and suitably falsified world. In stage 5, Plato blushes, an act which causes physical change in him. And for Plato, the truth does not permit any change. Nietzsche even goes so far as to deny the truths of mathematics and logic. In his aphorism, "Let us be on our guard in the gay science," Nietzsche denies that the cosmos is a living being, or a well-oiled machine, or eternal, or any other thing we could attribute to it. These are all puny anthropomorphism we have foisted on the world. On the contrary, Nietzsche says, the general character of the world, on the other hand, to all eternity chaos. Not by the absence of necessity, but in the sense of absence of order, structure, form, beauty, wisdom, and whatever else our aesthetic humanities are called. The forms which limited, now superfluous. Now we spirits are no longer restricted by any form, but maybe common sense, mere custom and habit, and run riot without these chains, even if our cheerfulness is merely a delusion. Yet, the error is not over. We still have another stage.
No, there is another.
Stage 6. We have abolished the real world. What world is left? The apparent world, perhaps?
But no!
With the real world, we have also abolished the apparent world. Midday, the moment of the shortest shadow, end of the longest error, zenith of mankind. INCIPIT! Zarathustra!
This is the dawning of the age of Zarathustra, the age of Zarathustra, 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 Zarathustra.
The final stage, the stage where the longest era finally ends. This is Nietzsche's most mature period. The philosophy of "Thus spake Zarathustra" and on the genealogy of morals is the final stage. The idea that the world we live in is merely apparent comes from the insistence that there is a true real world somewhere else. The idea that the world of appearances is false and illusory again comes from the belief in another world which is real and true. The distinction between real and apparent is abolished, leaving only the world. Without the real world and the truth it founded, we have no reason to believe the world we live in is false. Nietzsche's prophet Zarathustra is the meaning of the earth, of the only world there is, in its full positivity. We affirm the world fully. Contrary to Plato's beliefs, the truth does change, and it is a thing of this world. The truth, as understood by the aesthetic ideal, does not exist, but our truths do exist. In the final stage, Nietzsche's perspectivism comes to the fore. There are many truths in our world. These truths are not equal. They differ in power, in utility, and strength. Truths exist as socially and culturally constructed. This understanding allows us to answer our truths with solutions in our world. Nietzsche's answer to understanding our truths is the transvaluation of all values. Nietzsche overcomes the negative relativism from stage 5. Unlike Kant, who posits there is a single, universally applicable system of morality, Nietzsche at one point questions how everyone, everywhere in the world could possibly all know of such a thing. Nietzsche claims we must understand our own truths and our own morals so that we may overcome them. For that is the meaning of life, the eternally recurring command to overcome oneself. We create our own boundaries by our ability to overcome them or not. Our world is agonistic, from the ancient Greek word agon, which means conflict. Our world of becoming is one of constant conflict and overcoming. To overcome is to affirm one's existence over and over again in our world. This is the end of the video. Do you agree with my interpretation? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thanks to my several patrons for their support. Bye.
Let the earth shine, let the earth shine in, the earth shine in. Let the earth shine, let the earth shine in, the earth shine in. Let the earth shine, let the earth shine in, the earth shine in.